Hey everyone, I'm Liz Fairy, and today I'm going to show you how I made these crochet daisy flowers. I used my flowers to make a crocheted potted plant, which I'll show you how I did in a future video. Some things you'll need for this tutorial are a crochet hook. Different hook sizes will result in different sizes of flower. I used a size E hook. I'll also be using a pair of scissors, some stitch markers or bobby pins, a yarn needle. You'll need some craft wire if you want your flower to be able to stand up, and you'll need yarn. The weight of the yarn you use will result in different sizes of flower. In this video, I'll use some Aran weight yarn. I'll use golden yellow for the middle of the flower, white for the petals, and light green for the stem and leaves. You can really use any color you like as long as you use a shade of yellow for the middle and a shade of green for the stem and leaves. If you'd like to follow along with this project, you can purchase the written pattern for this flower in my Ravelry store. You can find that link in the description below. I'm going to begin my flower with a magic circle with 6 stitches of single crochet using my yellow yarn. If you want to see how to make a magic circle in more detail, check out my magic circle and my double magic circle tutorials. Now to finish this little circle at the middle of the flower, I'll slip stitch to the first stitch of the magic circle, cut off a long tail of my yarn, and I'll use that tail to sew the yellow circle to the center of the flower later. Next I'll use my white yarn to create the petals. First I'll create a slip knot using my white yarn. And then chain 17. That first chain will be the foundation chain, and the next 16 chains are going to make up the first petal. So I'll mark the second chain with a bobby pin since it counts as the first stitch of the row. To complete that first petal, I'll slip stitch to the foundation chain, then I'll repeat that until there are a total of 9 petals on the foundation chain. So chain 16, then slip stitch to the foundation chain. Now I have a total of 9 petals made up of 16 chains each. To end the row, I'll slip stitch to the first chain of the first petal, which is this chain here right after the foundation chain that we marked with a bobby pin. Then I'll cut off the yarn and sew in the end. Now I'll attach the yellow circle to the front of the flower. First I'll place the yellow circle at the center of the flower, then I'll sew the yellow circle to the petals using the yellow yarn tail. And now I've finished with the flower. Next, before I make the stem, I want to point out that I'm using some footage from my fire flower tutorial and my pansy flower tutorial for this part of the video, because I made the stem exactly the same way I made those other stems, so I'll just use that footage to save time. I'll make a wire skeleton for the stems and leaves, so that the flower will be able to stand up. First, I folded down an inch at the end of the wire, forming a loop at the bottom. And I twisted that around the bottom to secure the loop. Then I made the wire skeleton with a 3-inch base of the stem, two 2-inch leaves with another loop at the end of each leaf wire, two and a half inches at the middle of the stem, and 3.5 inches of extra wire at the top of the stem curved into a circle to support the flower. The full length of the stem ended up being about 5.5 inches long. If you want to see a more detailed explanation for how I make my wire skeletons, check out my wire skeleton tutorial. Now that I've finished my wire skeleton, I can crochet directly onto the wire to create the stem. If you want, you can make the flower without the wire by just working on a foundation chain instead. If you're doing that, just chain 23 before beginning, and single crochet into the foundation chain, beginning with the 3rd chain from the hook. But I'll work my single crochet row directly onto the wire instead, so that the flower can stand up. So using my green yarn, and leaving a long tail of yarn that I'm going to use to help cover up the wire later, I'll create a slip knot, then slip stitch to the wire loop at the base of the stem. Now I'll single crochet around the wire, moving along the full length of the wire until I reach the top of the stem, right under the circle, and leaving the 2 leaf wires out. I'll single crochet a total of 21 stitches around the wire. I'm not going to work onto the circle. This part will end up inside the flower in a later step. Now I'm going to make the part that goes at the back of the flower. First, I'll make the foundation for this part by chaining 2, Then into the second chain from the hook, I'll single crochet 1, and I'll mark that as the first stitch of this new part. Then into the same stitch, I'll single crochet 5 more times, so that I have a total of 6 single crochets in this row around the top of the wire stem. Now I'll begin to work in the round with the wire stem at the center of the circle. First, I'll increase every stitch of this row. So first I'll increase into the stitch that I marked as the first stitch of the row. And now, as you can see, the wire is popping out of the middle of the circle, so now I'll increase that first stitch by single crocheting again into the same stitch. Then, if you want to add a little extra detail, you could add a picot after each increase of the row, to make a sort of leafy shape around the base of the flower. To make a picot, I'll chain 3, then slip stitch into the third chain from the hook. I'll do this after every increase of the row, but of course this is an optional step, and if you want you could skip the picots and just put a plain circle at the back of your flower. So now I'll single crochet 2 times into the next stitch, and then make another picot by chaining 3, then slip stitch to the third chain from the hook. At the end of my row of increases, I'll slip stitch to the first stitch of the row to end the row, and I'll cut off the yarn, leaving a long tail. I'll use the tail at the bottom of the stem to stitch all around the wire all along the stem to cover the wire once I'm finished making the flower. And then I'll use the other tail to sew the flower to the top of the stem. And now that I'm finished making the circle for the back of the flower, I'll form the wire circle to be the same size and shape as the circle so that the wire will fit inside the flower. Next, I'll make the leaves. I'll begin the leaves the same way I made the stem, by single crocheting directly onto the wire. But for the leaves, I'll first start by pulling up a loop using my green yarn into the stitch of the stem closest to the bottom of the leaf wire. And leaving a long tail of yarn, I'll pull up a loop into that stitch and chain 1. This won't really count as a stitch, so I won't bother marking it. Now, just like when I made the stem, I'll single crochet 6 times directly onto the wire, until I reach the loop at the tip of the leaf wire. Then I'll single crochet 2 times into the wire loop at the end of the leaf wire. This row I just made will now act as the foundation row for the leaf I'm about to make. Again, if you're not using a wire for yours, you could just chain 8 after pulling up a loop from the stem instead, before proceeding to the next step. So next, I'm going to create a picot. So I'll chain 3, and I'll mark the first chain that I just made, even though this picot doesn't really count as a stitch, just because this is the stitch that I'm going to slip stitch to when I end the row. This will make it easier to find this stitch to work into it later. So make a picot just like before, with a slip stitch in the third chain from the hook, the same stitch that I just marked. This picot is going to form the tip of the leaf. Then I'll turn the work, and I'll work all along the other side into the front loops of the stitches that I just made around the wire, and I'll leave the back loops open so that I can work onto those loops when I make the other side of the leaf. I'll also work this row around the wire to help cover up the wire a little better. So to create this leaf, into the front loop of the next stitch and around the wire, I'll single crochet 1, this will count as the first stitch of the row. Then into the next stitch, I'll create a half double crochet. To do this, I'll yarn over and insert my hook into the front loop of the next stitch, then pull up a loop and pull another loop through all 3 loops on the hook. Into the next stitch, I'll create a double crochet stitch. To do this, I'll yarn over and insert my hook into the front loop of the next stitch, then pull up a loop and pull a loop through 2 of the loops on my hook. Then pull another loop through the remaining 2 loops on my hook. And as you can see, the leaf is beginning to slowly widen. Okay, now in the next stitch, I'll create the bottom of the leaf. So into the front loop of the next stitch, I'm going to create another double crochet, then another half double crochet, and a single crochet, all into the same front loop of the same stitch. And that has tapered the bottom of the leaf. Next, I'm going to turn the work, and now I'll work along the other side into the back loop of the same stitches that I just worked into for the previous row, starting with the back loop of the stitch that I just worked into for the last 3 stitches of the previous row. On this side of the leaf, I'll mirror what I did on the other side, which means I'll do the same thing, but in reverse. So into the back loop of the next stitch, I'm going to create a single crochet, a half double crochet, and a double crochet all into the same back loop of the same stitch. Then into the next stitches of the row, I'll double crochet 1, half double crochet 1, and single crochet 1. Then to end the row, I'll slip stitch to the first chain of the picot that I marked in the previous row. Then I'll cut off a long tail of yarn and use the tails to stitch around the wire all along the leaf to cover up the wire. I'll repeat the same process for the wire on the other side to create another leaf. Now that I've finished making the stem, I'll use the tails to stitch around the wire to hide it completely. I'll start with the tail at the bottom of the stem. First, I'll sew around the loop at the bottom of the wire until it's covered completely. Then I'll sew around the wire, placing my needle under the loops at the tops of the stitches all along the wire to leave those loops out because I think it gives it a more neat appearance. Once I've finished sewing the wire in all along the stem and both leaves, I'll sew in the excess green yarn tail ends, all except the one at the top of the stem, which I'll use to sew the flower to the top of the stem. And now the flower is finished. I made 3 of these flowers, which I then used to make a little flower pot, which I'll show you how to do in a future video. If you're interested in the written pattern for this flower, you can find the link to my pattern store on Ravelry, where you can find all my designs in the description below. I really love how simple these little flowers are, and yet they look so much like a real flower because of the way the chain behaves. Are there any other flowers you'd like to see me try and make on the channel? Let me know in the comments. And as always, if you use this technique to make a flower of your own, I'd love to see your interpretation. You can find all of my social media links in the description below. If you enjoyed this tutorial, you could press the like button or share it on social media. And if you'd really like to help out the channel, you can donate to my Patreon. You can get some pretty cool perks through Patreon, like seeing my videos early, access to some of my prototype patterns, and discounts in my Ravelry store, depending on your level of donation. You can find out more about that at patreon.com/fairyrings. You could also subscribe and click the bell icon so that you don't miss my next video. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!